Today we are starting notes for section 2.2, and section 2.2 is going to be all about absolute value. This should be a term that we are somewhat familiar with as we've been practicing our vocabulary throughout this whole unit, but today we're going to look at what absolute value really is. There should be a blank copy of the notes on Schoology that you should have with you, whether you are splitting your screen and doing it on your iPad, or maybe you have a paper copy out for you. But feel free to pause and rewind the video at any point as you're going, as you fill out that note sheet. Okay, so let's take a look at our lesson objectives here for this section. So by the end of our notes, and then as we continue to practice throughout the week, you guys will be able to understand the absolute value of a number and its distance from 0 on a number line, and also be able to interpret absolute value as magnitude for a positive or negative quantity in a real world situation. So we're going to look at just absolute value of numbers and then how we can use it in real life and in word problems. Okay, so we have just one vocab word for this section, and that is absolute value. We know that absolute value is the distance a number is from 0, and when we think about that, because we're talking a bit about distance, we know that distance cannot be negative. I can't say that I walked -2 feet. Doesn't work like that. So instead, when we think about absolute value is always going to be positive. The absolute value of a number is always positive because we are working with distance. The distance a number is from 0. All right, so let's take a look at what this means with some problems. Our first objective, when we're just learning how to write the absolute value of a number, it can be helpful to think about our number lines. We've done a ton of practice with number lines over the past couple of weeks, so this is how we are going to use it in relation to absolute value. Okay, so if I were to look at number 1, when I have those two brackets, those two lines on either side of a number, that's telling me that I'm solving for absolute value, the distance that number is from 0. So my first number is looking at -10. If I find -10 on my number line here, I find that it is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 spots away from 0. It is a positive 10 spots away from 0. Let's say I wanted to look at 3, the absolute value of positive 3. I want to count how many spaces it is away from 0. 1, 2, 3. Let's look at another example that would be on here. -8, if I find -8 here, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so maybe we've picked up on a pattern here so far. If I look at finding the absolute value of 6, 6 isn't on my number line here. But based on my knowledge and the work that we've done already with 1, 2, and 3, I can conclude that my absolute value of 6, positive 6, is also going to be positive 6. It is 6 spots away from 0. Okay, so this might look similar to opposites. However, absolute value is different than opposites because our answers are always positive. Okay, even if we start with a positive number, our answer is still positive. All right, so let's take what we just did in those first 4 problems and look at how we can now use inequalities or write inequalities using our absolute value. So I want to compare the absolute value of -26 to the absolute value of 30. In order to do that, I first need to know my absolute value of each of those numbers. So for these types of problems, exactly the work that I am showing you is what I expect from you. So right below -26, I want to write what its absolute value is, which would be positive 26. For 30, my absolute value is positive 30. Now I can compare. 26 is less than 30. Okay, so I've shown my absolute value below, and I'm using that then to draw or write my inequality. Let's look at the next one. So, negative 705, finding the absolute value of that, its distance from 0 is positive 705 units. For negative 358 would be positive 358. I can see that 705 is greater than 358. Therefore, I need to write in my greater than symbol. And the last one here, I have a positive 510 and also a 500 distance. So I'm going to show the greater than symbol, that the absolute value of 510 is greater than the absolute value of negative 500. Okay, so that's all about what the basic understanding of what absolute value is, what it looks like on a number line, and then how we can compare numbers when finding their absolute value. Now we're going to look at how absolute value comes into play when we look at some word problems and more real world, real life situations. Okay, so looking in this next example, we want to use this table that shows a monthly bank account statement for the period of August to November. Okay, so we have our months across the top, our balances on the bottom telling us how much money was in that bank account during that month. So, letter A, for which months was the account overdrawn? Overdrawn might be a new word to us that we might not have ever heard before. When we are looking at bank accounts that are overdrawn, or there was too much money taken out of it, that we're now in the negative numbers of our balance. So this is negative. We're looking for which months the balance was negative. We can see that August had a negative balance and September had a negative balance. So I'm going to write August and September. In letter B, how much was the bank owed in September? Well, look at September. Our balance was negative $170. So my absolute value of negative 170 is positive 170, so that this person owed the bank $170. We wouldn't say I owe the bank negative $170. That's how we use absolute value to make it positive. How much money do we need to get to a balance of 0? Okay, letter C, in which month was the account overdrawn by the greatest amount? The account that had the most negative balance. So between these two, we can see that August had the greatest, or the greatest amount owed to the bank, or the lowest number, the most negative balance. So, August. Right, and the last one that we're looking at here, so how much money was deposited from September to October? So starting in September, how much money was added into the bank account to get to the balance of October? So we can see our numbers for September and October. We're starting at negative $170, and then my balance in October is $100. So how much money is that in total that was added into the bank account? And this is where we're going to use our absolute value to help us. So first I need to start at negative $170, and I've got to get to 0. So that would be my distance to 0. Plus the amount of money that from my balance of 0 to get to 100 would be the absolute value of 100. So this translates to 170 plus 100. So altogether, $270 was deposited into the bank from September to October. We want to think about this as a visual. I'm here at negative 170. Money is added to $0. And then more money was added to get to $100. So altogether, that distance or that total amount of money ends up being 270. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. So in this next problem, we're going to use our description and the picture to help us solve, to have a nice visual with us. So a dog is standing on a cliff 35 feet above sea level. We have our dog here in our picture, 35 feet above sea level. Remember, sea level is at 0 feet. A dolphin is swimming 6 feet below sea level, and an octopus is moving along the seabed 40 feet below sea level. So we have our picture here showing us exactly where each of these animals are located. So to find our answer for letter A, what is the vertical distance between the dog and the octopus? I want to find my distance from the dog at the top to the octopus down at the bottom. So similar to letter D on the problem above, I'm starting at a positive 35 feet for the dog, that distance. I need to find the dog's distance to sea level, which would be its absolute value, and then I need to add my octopus's absolute value or its distance to 0 to find that total amount between here. So this ends up being positive 35 plus a positive 40. So altogether, that distance from the dog to the octopus is 75 feet. 35 to here, and then 40 down below, altogether making it a positive 75 feet. All right, next one. How far above the dolphin is the dog? So now we're looking at the dog compared to the dolphin. My dog's distance to 0, I want to find it to sea level, is going to be that 35 again. I want to add it to then my dolphin's distance to sea level, which is -6 right now, -6 feet. My absolute values end up being 35 plus a 6. So altogether, the distance between the dog and the dolphin is 41 feet. If we notice so far, what we've done in problem A and B here, as well as problem D, is we've had one number that's negative and one number that's positive. All three of those times when we've had a positive number and a negative number, we've added those distances together. Okay, so one, a positive, positive and negative tells us that we're going to add. But now let's look at maybe when we have two negatives. So for part C, what is the distance between the dolphin and the octopus? So if I am the dolphin here at -6 and the octopus is at -40, I'm not crossing over that sea level or trying to find my distance to 0 of both numbers because they're both negative. I just want to find now the difference between those two. So instead of adding, I'm going to subtract. To get a difference of 34 feet. 34 feet distance between them. So if I have a negative and a negative, I'm going to subtract. Just like if I had two positives. So a positive and a positive tells me I'm also going to subtract. All right, final question on here, part D. We're looking at which is closer to sea level or 0 feet, the dog or the octopus. Okay, we're looking at their distance from 0, so that we're going to use our absolute value to help us. So let's find our absolute value of both of them. Our dog is 35, and then the octopus is -40. So this ends up being 35, our octopus is 40. We look at those numbers to see which one is closer to 0. 35 is closer to 0, so the dog is closer to sea level. All right, we have one more that we're going to look at here. So that previous one was really nice because it gave us a picture and gave us a description. Now we're going to look at when maybe you're only given the description and we can figure out how to draw a picture to help us with that visual. So at a parking garage, you can park underground or above ground. The lowest part of the underground parking is 40 feet below ground. I'm going to highlight some of this important information. The underground parking is 40 feet below ground level. The highest part of the parking garage is 20 feet above ground level. We also know that the limousine parking is 23 feet below ground. So let's take a second and draw this out. Okay, if I have my highest part up here, that's our 20 feet above ground level. My ground level would be at 0 feet. I want to include that there. I also know that my lowest level for the underground parking is 40 feet below. So down here, if it's below, that makes it negative. My 40 feet is my underground parking. And the final part that I need to include in here is where my limos are going to be. And that's 23 feet below ground. So 23 feet below ground is our limo. Okay, so now we have a nice picture to kind of help us out as a visual with where each of these parts in this parking garage are. So for letter A, use positive and negative numbers to represent the locations with respect to ground level of the 3 parts of the parking garage. In our drawing, we've now identified that. We have our highest level at positive 20 feet, our limo at negative 23 feet, and our underground parking at negative 40 feet. So I'm going to put those 3 numbers here for letter A. 20 feet, negative 23 feet, and negative 40 feet. For letter B, which part of the parking garage is closest to ground level or 0 feet? Which one is closest to 0? We want to draw on our distances to 0 at each of these points or their absolute values. So I'm going to find my absolute value of each of these. My distance from 0 is still 20 feet. Now it's a positive 23 feet and a positive 40 feet. I can see that my 20 feet is the closest one to 0. Therefore, the highest level above ground is closest to ground level. Okay, so we can see how absolute value can help us in finding distances between different points. Maybe when we have things that are below sea level, below ground level, when they're in a negative direction, and then how that can help us when we're finding the total distance between another point in our space in those real world situations. Okay? So feel free to rewatch this if you need to. If you have questions, come to class ready to ask questions, and I will see you then.